This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
The champion, welcome, Danny Batten.
Hey guys, I'm Si, and welcome to A.C.E Podcast Nation, the home of the Danny Batten Fight Show. This is episode number 105, and another action-packed show planned for this evening, full of combat sports conversation. We're live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, as always. If you prefer your podcast in audio form, then you, of course, catch us at the Sports Social Podcast Network, the UK's first all sports podcast network. So check us out there, as well as all the other content produced by A.C.E Podcast Nation. Please do give us a subscribe on YouTube and that follow on social media. All of that good stuff really helps us out. Drop a like on the video. These are the sorts of things that help us rise up the YouTube algorithms and the Google searches and all this good stuff. We've been blessed with some incredible guests this year, and tonight is no different. But joining me as ever, first and foremost, former Cage Warriors champion, UK MMA legend, Mr. Daniel Batten. How are you, mate?
I'm good. Ready and raring to go for another weekend of podcasting.
Indeed, mate. Loads to talk about this evening. It's been just, I mean, we got so much to talk about just with our guest, but also then there's been UFC, there's been loads of boxing. We got Ben coming on later to talk about the boxing, so it's gonna be fun. I love it. But joining us for his second appearance, I think UFC veteran now, most recently seen in Cage Warriors, is MMA welterweight Rhys McKee. How are you, buddy?
Yes, I'm good. Thanks for having me on. It is my second time on the show, so pleasure to get a chat with you lads again.
Good stuff, mate. Yeah, so I knew you'd definitely been on. Obviously, I knew you'd been on before, but I couldn't remember if you'd been on once or twice. But as my memory is shocking. But the last time we had you on, I know this for sure, you had just come out of the UFC. And you had some stuff to say during the show. I had some stuff to say. I was told that I was a bit critical of the UFC afterwards, maybe with a bit of their treatment of you, which I still stand by the way. I still felt like they kind of stitched you up a little bit. You had a bit of a rough run. They didn't maybe showcase you as best they could. But you know, I also understand it. It's the fight game. You take fights on short notice and things like this. But since then, you made your return to the cage, which seems like a long time coming. What was the wait like for that? Because I'm assuming you must have been like really keen to get back in there after your UFC release.
I was really keen to get in there, but kind of my support circle around me kind of made me take the time and kind of forced me to take the time. I think I was going to fight in the September show, which was or not September, then maybe the August or whatever it was. It was a bit sooner, but I postponed that and then said I'd wait till October. I was very keen, but the time was fantastic. Mindset wise, I came back a lot sharper, a lot more focused. So I'm glad I took the time. At the time, it was hard, but I'm really happy I took the time.
What did you do with that additional time then that you had, sort of where you would have planned to have fought? Were you training, or were you kind of relaxing and maybe, I've been doing a bit of socializing because things had opened up a little bit?
You know what? The first 2 or 3 months, or the first maybe 2 months, I was kind of training like 50% kind of where I should have been training. Like, not doing anything too serious, not really pushing the boat out. And then after that, once it hit the new year, I had a solid 9 months of prep for that fight. Obviously I didn't know who I was fighting. I was just preparing all on myself. So I had 9 or 10 months really focused training. So no, I definitely wasn't doing too much socializing, just a lot of getting ready for nothing. But I knew when I did fight, I'd get a much more improved version.
Good stuff, mate. So you made your return at Cage Warriors. Was it always going to be Cage Warriors where you were going to make that return? Was there sort of any conversations with other promotions, or did you ever sort of feel like you might go elsewhere for that return, or did it feel like a natural fit?
You know what? Like at the start, it was very week by week. Sometimes I was like very like, oh, I want to take a new career path. I want to, maybe go fight in Poland. That was a conversation at the time in KSW. I was talking with EFN at the time about all these other options and fighting in Europe. But then, like, the longer or the further the release was away, the more I seen that I still very much was wanting to get to the UFC again. So it made the most obvious route to go back to the UFC or to go back to the Cage Warriors to get to the UFC again. So there wasn't conversation with anybody else because I had them offers, and to be honest, they were nice, but I never really listened.
So the aim is still to go back to the UFC. Do you feel like you've got a point to prove, or is it more a case of you just want to show what you're capable of?
Well, both statements are probably correct. Like, I do have a point to prove, but at the same time, I do have a point to prove. But I feel like if I was back in the UFC now, I would just show what I am. I don't think I have to do much improving to get back to the UFC. I think I know for certain I'm UFC level, and I would fight some of them top guys and beat them and put them away. So I have a point to prove, and to myself, I have a chip on my shoulder against the UFC, not in a better way, but I'm very excited to be there and very much kind of have a told you so moment. So but that's on me. But I'm definitely not better against them. I just want to have that told you so moment. So that excites me.
Yeah, and I guess because you've got the belief in yourself that you belong there, and that's you're more than good enough to be there. I guess it's just a case of almost you feel like you're just waiting to get back there to have that moment. Obviously, you had the two fights against Moreno and the one with Chimaev. Are those two guys that you would like to fight again further down the line?
Yeah. All willing if it lines up correctly. It'd be great to fight. It'd be great to fight Morano quite early when I'm back in, and then it'd be nice to fight Kamzat. Coming into that top 10, top 5, wherever he ends up. There I'm one of them guys. Like when I do lose to a guy, I would like to fight them again always, but I know who knows how it lines up. I think maybe Morano could be retired by then. I know he's up the years a bit more than me, so who knows what could happen, but definitely I would love to run both of the fights back.
I like it, mate. Danny, you're looking you're a bit blurry, but I think your audio's fine, mate. So just keep going. Yeah. Before I get Rhys's kind of feelings on his return fight, it wasn't it was. I was going to say it wasn't competitive, but it was competitive. But Rhys was particularly impressive. What did you make of, if you can remember, of Rhys's comeback fight on Cage Warriors 129? Which was a while ago now.
Yeah, it almost looked like he took some of the frustrations of what happened regards UFC out on that poor fella, because it was a really dominant impactful experience that I witnessed him put on the guy. Very, very dominant. I feel like Rhys McKee is stuck in a really difficult situation of both being sort of beyond just European level and really needing to step up on the world class stage of UFC. But like we've discussed, it just didn't go his way for reasons that we feel, or I feel, and I think you agree, Si, that the matchups for the first two fights were just not great growth fights for him. I just, what, you're 26 years old now, is that right? You're 20. Yeah, I mean, still very, very young. So I just see it that. I mean, I don't know what your long-term plans are. I mean, we know you want to go to UFC, but regards how many fights you're expecting to have before perhaps stepping back in there, I think on the European level of things, you're going to keep notching up these impressive wins, and hopefully UFC will sit up and take you back on board again and get you back at A.S.E by the time you sort of turn in 28 years old. I think there should be an 18-month to 2-year plan to get back there. I don't know how many fights you plan to have a year. I did have a little look down your record, and for the last few years, you've only had a couple of fights a year. Have you got sort of like an optimum amount of times that you would like to fight throughout a year if injuries are all clear and all good?
So I think, earlier in my career, I used to always fight 3 to 4 times a year, and that was really, really good. That was really good for me. And then obviously, with COVID happening and stuff, it took the last 2 years been really weird. I only had one fight this year. For me, I believe moving forward, 2 more wins and I'll be in the UFC again. So I feel I could, with one more impressive win in the finish, I believe they could call me if the time and the lines or something. But I think 2 more wins, that'll be 3 outside of the UFC since the release. I think that's all I kind of really need. I would love to be fighting 3 times a year actively in the UFC again, though, for sure. That's 3 a year would be perfect.
Interesting. It's interesting stuff. For some reason I thought you were 28, Rhys. So you have got you really got age on your side in terms of a career and how much is kind of left and all that sort of stuff. Injuries permitting, obviously. But like Danny said there, like a 2-year plan. Is 2 years the sort of time, or the 18 months? Is that the sort of time frame you're looking at, or you're looking at getting there as early as possible? Because the way when we were just speaking, waiting for Danny, you seemed very kind of set in I want to get back there as soon as possible and really show what I can do.
Yeah, both answers. I think being realistic, nothing's going to be done really under 12 months. So I think the kind of in my head, I'm looking at March of 23. So I'm looking at fighting here, and so I think I have to get surgery in January on my leg. So I'm looking at a June fight this year, June fight next year, and then maybe October or November would be my 2 wins, and then. All being well, UFC might return to London in 23 of March, and then that would be perfect for me. So that's kind of how I see it going in my head. Obviously, if I got one fight and they come back and it was the right matchup, I would jump in. If not, then I'd be happy to get them too and sit there.
So that's interesting to me as well, because obviously you took the Chimaev fight on pretty short notice. No one else wants to fight him, it seems. And obviously you fought Alex Morano then as well. When you look back at the Chimaev fight, or the taking of the Chimaev fight on that short notice, and it was your UFC debut, do you, with hindsight, think I shouldn't have taken that fight, or do you sort of stand by it and say, no, I should have taken that fight because if I had got the win, it would have gone a whole different way?
Yeah. Even with the loss in mind. I still would have took the fight. It still shaped my career, and it still took me down a path where I needed to learn a lot of lessons off it. At the time, I was scheduled to fight Adam Proctor in Manchester. I remember thinking this when I signed it. So I was due to fight Adam Proctor in Manchester, and I remember thinking that Adam Proctor would have been a really tough fight, but he had a similar style to Kamzat. He was just going to wrestle. So I said I'd rather go to Dubai, throw all my eggs into one basket, and gamble being held down in Abu Dhabi than being held down in a cold arena in Manchester. So the way I looked at it was, I'd rather take the risk and gamble, and risk big and go for it. People say risk big. There's no real big risk in MMA. It's a passion. I'm going to get back. I'm 20. At the time, I was 24. I knew I had a chance to make a second run at it anyway. It wasn't like my one shot anyway. So, it's all about perspective. Some people say, "Oh, you were crazy," but I would have done it again. I'd do it again, to be honest, if I could rewind time.
Well, that's why I asked you, because I heard, like, when you were talking then, you said, or if a short-term fight comes up. So straight away, I sort of thought, all right, so you would take another short-term fight if it was the right opponent and good for you, then you'd still go and do it.
I think as long, the difference with the Shimaev fight, not to contradict myself, the difference with the Shimaev one, I wasn't training. I didn't have a fight camp. I literally I went into the gym the day I accepted the fight and had a quick wrestle with my coach. That was the first training I'd done in about 12 weeks, just with lockdowns and stuff. I mean, I was still running and sweating and all that stuff, but I wasn't doing MMA. I didn't wrestle. I didn't grapple. I didn't spar. So I would take a short notice fight as long as I was training, if that makes sense. But if I was cold turkey the way I was at that last fight, which I shouldn't have been, I learned a lot from being in that condition. I wouldn't take it if I was in that condition again, but as long as I was ready, I would.
Yeah, it's one of them, isn't it? It's very difficult, like, especially from the outside looking in. It's you got to make a decision for yourself with your team and stuff like that. But like making your UFC debut against someone who's gone on and shown that they're very, very, very good fighter, very talented. I suppose doing that on the back of not really training for 12 weeks other than fitness training is probably not ideal.
Yeah, do you think? You know what? It's crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you say it out loud like that, it's madness. Like,
yeah, it really is. But at the time, like, I remember flying over to Abu Dhabi, and like, I believed I could beat him, and I still do believe I can beat him. And people are going to laugh and scoff and be like, "Well, you didn't show too much of that." But like in my mind and in my mind space, on the way over, I was going to win that fight. It wasn't a case of, I wasn't going over for a paycheck. I wasn't going over for a nice track, so I was going to win. So as long as I know that was in my mind, that was in my head, I was flying there for the right reasons.
Yeah, and the other thing, I suppose. So here's a question, hypothetical question. Say you've got a friend in MMA who's in like Cage Warriors or the equivalent now, and they got offered a similar fight with someone who's got a bit of a reputation on very little notice, with no fight camp no fighting, no training for 12 weeks. Would you advise them to take it, or would you be advising them not to take it and wait for the right opportunity?
It's a tough question, but I have a really good example. So, funny enough, the day we were meant to interview, I was cornering a young kid. He's a guy. His name's Corey, and he was fighting, and he had a really bad injury, so he didn't train for 4 weeks prior to it. So I was texting him, and I remember saying to him, like, "How's your ribs?" Like, obviously it was his rib. You haven't been training, so I was like, "What do you want to do? Like, it's not a great situation." But in his mind, he was like, he knew all he needed to do was turn up and fight the way he can fight. But he had a really bad injury, so from my perspective, I would have advised him not to fight. However, he was so headstrong and mindset strong wise that he wanted to fight. He went in and fought, and he knocked the guy out in 13 seconds. So it's like one of them situations. I probably would have advised him not to, but it paid off in that case. So it's funny, yes, that's a great example, and it's pretty realistic. But I probably would have advised no, but it still worked.
I like it, mate. I like it. I like the confidence in it. So you returned against A.C.E. I'm going to butcher this poor man's name. Mantikivi. How did you think the fight went, and what was the build up like? Do you have any nerves or anything like that?
You know what? It was. I think it was the first fight in a long, long time in my career where I had no nerves. I was just settled. I was just happy. So it almost felt like I had a job. like I was in an acting job where I had this fight and it was like a scene and it wasn't a real fight. That's what the way it felt. Nothing felt real. So the camp was fantastic. I had good training partners. I had a lot of good sparring. I had minimal injuries. It all went very smooth, and in the end, it showed in the fight. Like that's exactly how we thought the fight would go. I did want to wrestle more. I did want to take him down and beat him up a bit more than I did, um, rather than strike because I wanted to show like I wrestled a lot for that fight camp, not due to that fight, just because I wanted to. So I wish I shown that, but I was really happy with how I felt going into it. You know, a lot of people talk about coming out of the UFC and the mind space and the head space. I get none of it. I felt fantastic. I actually felt like I don't know how to describe it, but I definitely didn't feel under motivated or any less motivated than I normally would. It would have been another way for me. I would have felt more motivated.
Yeah, like when we spoke to you, like I think it was literally like maybe a week or two after you'd come out of the UFC, like you seemed very sort of calm. You seemed quite, comfortable with the situation. You seemed motivated. You had your say on the subject, but you weren't like really bitter. You weren't really angry.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say like you seemed like maybe a little bit pissed off, but not necessarily with them or with like anyone. It was more this, and I'm obviously talking. You can correct me if I'm wrong by all means, but it seemed maybe like you were more frustrated that you hadn't been able to show what you were capable of in those two fights, which obviously for people who like us who watch Cage Warriors, we've seen what you're capable of over the years. So I can understand that frustration. It was quite I was just looking then. It was almost a year between the Alex Moreno fight and then your return fight at Cage Warriors 129. Like that is there's quite a long sort of gap between fights. Was that gap particularly frustrating? Like, because like you said, you wanted to get in there earlier than October.
Well, like you have to take 1 month of it was until the UFC released me, so that was 1 month away. And then moving into the new year, lockdowns were still up in the air, and then that was it. I wanted to actually fight in Cage Warrior show in March, like March being cut in December. I was going to fight in March, and then I remember at the time, like funny enough, I remember this. I was texting Ian Dean, and I was texting him about the show, and I said I think Mantakivi was meant to fight the fella Matters, the Latvian guy. He's meant to fight him, and I remember I joked with Ian Dean and said, "Oh, if you get me flights for tomorrow, I'll fly over and fight Alessi." So that was when I actually kind of wanted to come back. And then for some reason or another, I can't remember, but I wasn't in a bad headspace. It wasn't like I wasn't sitting at home anxious to fight again. I was just happy training, and I knew it was coming back. It's not as if I was ever retiring. I wasn't. I didn't feel anything really. I don't feel like I don't feel like it was a year in between because I'm so busy in life. It's not. I don't. I'm up to a lot of things. It's not as if like this is like it is my only focus, but it's like I have a lot to do in the interim.
Keeps you busy.
Yeah,
It's in terms of Cage Warriors now, like what are you looking at achieving like there now? What's next for you with them?
So I know that this whole title romance picture, like, and very much when I signed back to Cage Warriors, I said, "Don't draw me in. I don't want Drew into the story of like who should fight who, and he wants a title, and he wants a title, and I didn't want. I'm here for wins. I'm here for W's, and that's it. And if the title falls coincide with that, then I will. I think some of the people that are due to fight for the title aren't actually the biggest fights for me. And I say that as in they're all a lot of them are domestic names. I want to fight European ex-UFC guys. I know they signed uh, a guy from Italy. I actually mentioned his name under the Instagram for Leonardo. I can't remember his second name, but they signed the guy. And he fought for Bellator, he fought for UFC, and he's now signed to Cage Warrior. So, or Carlos Perezzoli, that's it, Carlos Perezzoli. I would like to fight him next. I think that's he's ex UFC, ex Bellator. I think that's the guy for me to fight. So I'm just here to win. You know, I don't really care about the title.
Yeah, and I think I can understand that, but definitely I'll make sure I clip that as well. You and you saying you want to fight Carlos, love a bit of clickbait, so that's the way for that. Gaz asked the question, Rhys. He says, Rhys, which welterweight, past or present, would you face if you could pick anyone?
Is that Cage Warriors?
It doesn't say. It just says any welterweight, past or present.
I'd like to fight Diaz. I'd like to mix it with Diaz. I think Carlos Condit. That I'll pick Carlos Condit because I remember saying if I beat Morano, I would have asked for Carlos Condit because I knew he was coming back. And I remember staying up to 4 a.m. I remember staying up to 4 a.m. watching him fight one time. So I thought that would have been a cool story for me to say. I thought that's really it. But one of them some of them big names is who I would have liked.
I think after last night, Nate Diaz may be busy, mate. I got a feeling he's going to be next up on the Jake Paul train, which we're going to talk about later. I'm going to make Ben talk about it. But hey, mate, look, you can't knock him. You can only beat what's in front of you. And look, I'll tell you what. Then here's a question for both of you, but I'll put it to Danny first, then, because he's been quiet for a little bit. Danny, has Tyron Woodley harmed his MMA legacy? Because I think when he retired or when he kind of stepped away from MMA, most people he was very, very respected. He'd had an amazing run to get the title. He defended it several times, and then he'd lost a few over the last couple of years, and he was getting older. Has he harmed his legacy by losing twice to Jake Paul?
For some people, that they might see it that way. I mean, it's not MMA at the end of the day. I did think that he passed his peak for whatever reasons in his MMA career, but he was still, great during the time that he was doing well, right? He done very, very good. He beat some amazing people, but then I don't know whether it's motivation, whether it's just an age thing. Father Time just crept up on him. I'm not too sure what it was. Only maybe he will know probably the answer to that, or maybe not. That might be the case. But he was very much former himself in terms of his success towards that part of his career. But this is boxing, and not even normal boxing, if you think of it in the literal sense of what it is. It's borderline exhibition matches. It's not like proper fights. I don't know how to categorize it.
Last night, mate. I think last night harmed him more than the first fight. The first fight, all right, whatever. Last night.
Okay, yeah, I think he fought better this time around. He fought better, but yeah, I mean, he got sparked out big.
How much bigger? Do either of you know how much bigger Jake Paul is in terms of if they were in the MMA? Would they be in the same weight class? Because when they stood next to each other after the fight, Jake Paul looks way bigger.
Yeah, I think he's huge. I don't know what weight he is, but he's definitely a big boy. And when he stands close to Tyron Woodley, who's massive himself, I'm not sure what he weighs though. Big boy.
You taking that fight, mate? If Jake Paul's calling out Rhys McKee, you taking that fight?
You know what? I think if any athlete or MMA guy or whatever they get offered that fight from Jake Paul, you're probably going to take it because you're going to make a very good payday. It is harmful. I do believe it is harmful for careers. So it just depends. If I was active in the UFC, I wouldn't touch it personally. I'm not going to go against the UFC to fight Jake Paul. But if they came in to me now at this stage in my career where I'm at, I would say, yeah, of course, let's go. Because I don't think that would hurt getting back.
Do you think one of the reasons though why we haven't seen a fighter in their peak, like an MMA fighter in their peak, fight Jake Paul, is because it is a risk? If someone who's 26, 27 from whatever not even necessarily UFC, but is on the way up in their MMA career, if they then go and take a fight with Jake Paul for the money, but then they get knocked out like Tyron Woodley did last night, it's going to harm your career, isn't it? Because the UFC is probably not going to touch you, and it's problematic.
Yeah,
I think
It depends what you value. Like it is a payday. But like if you're in the UFC and you're on up and you're 27, 28, the good age, and you're jumping out to fight Jake Paul, then it's entirely financial. Surely it's not as if you're going to go on to fight Canelo, or it's not a contender or anything like that. It's just a payday.
I see.
So
One thing I disagree with you, mate. Sorry to interrupt you. Is he's not a contender, by the way, but I do think that
it's not a
in
contender,
the next
exactly.
18 months to 2 years, say maybe even 3 years, Jake Paul, if he keeps winning, he will fight Canelo when Canelo's on his last legs of his career. They will fight. I almost guarantee it, just because I think Jake Paul's just seems to get under people's skin, and I think he's already begun it. And I think he'll end up fighting Conor McGregor, and I think he'll end up fighting Canelo in like 2 or 3 years when Canelo's about to retire.
It just depends how authentic Canelo is. Like, I don't think any Mexican to the level of Canelo would ever entertain the idea of fighting a YouTuber. But here, who knows? Money talks. Everybody has a price.
Yeah, and I did like a couple of comments straight away. As soon as I mentioned Jake Paul, in the comment was like that. There's already people saying conspiracy theories that Tyron Woodley took a dive and this, that, and the other. But Brad Baston says, "Evening, guys. Sad as it sounds, YouTubers are becoming the face of boxing. It looked like to me that Woodley dropped his hands on purpose, but he's counting the millions to get 2 million on his first fight. No doubt he's made more on this one. Definitely no knockout clause in that Jake Paul contract." So, like, the one thing I'd say about that is Jake Paul was throwing, I'm trying to work out which hand it was, the other hand basically to the side and the body, and he was kind of lining up that big right hook all the way through the fight, but wasn't throwing it. So like I can see how Tyron Woodley got caught with that particular shot, because Jake Paul had been setting it up, but like I said, we've talked to Ben a couple times over the last few weeks about, like, is it possible that there's these different clauses? Is it possible that it's corrupt and this, that, and the other? And unfortunately, there's a side of it which you just don't know. However, I will say, when I saw the Showtime clip, so like the feed which was on TV, I thought, I suppose it does look maybe as if he could have. But then when I saw a clip from someone who had filmed it at ringside, like the impact of the shot did seem legit. Like it was massive. It was a really big shot, and he put everything into it. It's just it's a weird thing. I don't know how I feel about it anymore.
So strange.
Yeah, like Tyron Woodley has probably made more money in those 2 fights that he made in his entire MMA career. So
yeah, that's
at least not far off. And like for him, so for Tyron Woodley, he's finished his MMA career. He's done those 2 boxing fights. Yes, all right. Some people will say his legacy's been harmed, but the man's put his health and body and life on the line to fight and entertain over a career of MMA fights. He's a former world champion. Why shouldn't he get a big final payday before he sails off into the sunset to spend time with his family? I got no issue with that whatsoever. It's a weird situation. Good for him.
Yeah. This is it too.
Who would you like to see Jake Paul fight then, Rhys? Because I know you're itching to see him fight again.
I think I'd like to see him fight. I think Tommy Fury. I think that obviously they were meant to fight. I think Tommy Fury's rubbish as well. I don't think Jake Paul's rubbish. I actually think he's good. I think he can box. I think Tommy Fury's not great, to be honest. I've seen him fight the guy Anthony Taylor, who was around Bama and Bellator back in the day, and he couldn't beat snow off a rope. So the fact that Tommy Fury struggled with him says a lot. So I'd like to see that fight, and I'd actually like to see Tommy getting beat. So I'm going to be Team Jake Paul for the next one.
So I got a question for you then, because everyone keeps saying he's got to fight a boxer. He's got to fight a boxer. Blah 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 blah. Well, he tried to fight a boxer, and the boxer pulled out for one. But also, so after watching that and the first fight with Tyron Woodley, I kind of think Jake Paul would beat Tommy Fury. I really do.
Oh, for sure. I agree massively.
Because I don't think Tommy Fury can live with that power that he had. So I saw someone, I forget who it was, someone on social media yesterday. I'll try and find it. But they were saying that they felt like Tommy Fury kind of pulled out because he realized that he was going to get beaten. And he knew that, like, it would have been a big thing for him to lose, for his family and you know, all the things which come with it. So I can kind of understand that thinking, but if he's a professional boxer, he should be expecting to beat someone who's 4 fights in or whatever.
Of course.
I don't know.
Yeah, of course. Like he gives Tommy Fury a whole load of troubles who he does, and obviously him being Tommy's brother or Tyson's brother and stuff like that, like it's not good. So I think I think we might not see that fight, but I do want to.
Yeah, I think people underestimate Jake Paul, and he's like, even Ben, who comes on for us and talks about boxing, who's going to come on in a bit. Like, even he said a couple of weeks back that, like, Jake Paul, he can box, and I think people underestimate his ability. And he's also young enough that he's still learning, and because he's got so much money, he can train with top level trainers.
He's got the best of everything. So, and you know what? He's training hard and he's hungry and he's motivated. So, you know, you can't fault him either.
Yeah, I dare I say it, Danny. I'm coming around to the Jake Paul training with regards to boxing, at least, because I think before the first Tyron Woodley fight, I was like, I hope Tyron Woodley knocks him out and this is the end of it. Now I'm like, I think I want him to beat Tommy Fury and then go and fight someone else. I'm getting ready for the McGregor fight, but McGregor's not going to fight him yet. So, you know, it'd be interesting.
Yeah,
it'd be really, really interesting.
It's all a bit of entertainment, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's all interesting, and I think the longer it goes on, even I'm getting dragged into the curiosity of seeing who they get matched up against next and what the outcome will be. But he's building up some trajectories, getting wins, and you can't take nothing away from him for that. And he's bringing boxing from a different angle. He's bringing boxing some kind of attention. And we all keep tuning in. We all keep watching it, don't we? So, I was not excited about the Woodley fight. I think I made that quite clear last week. But I think Woodley largely performed a little bit better than I was expecting him to perform. But yeah, boy, did he get knocked the hell out. And I think it was a legit knockout. I don't think it was set up. I don't think he took a dive for the money. I think he did the fight for the money without a shadow of a doubt. But I don't think anyone intends to get knocked out, or for the most part, for a few bucks. I just don't think that was the case. But yeah.
Well, it's the thing. So with the Logan Paul one, with the Mayweather, I could understand that to a certain extent. Like, Mayweather was kind of holding him up, wasn't he? And he looked like he was out cold. I kind of get that, because that was a full-on exhibition. Like, these are classed as professional fights, aren't they? They're under various commissions or whatever. The first one I thought I saw a lot of people saying, "Oh, Tyron Woodley, he didn't try and knock him out. There was a clause." But Tyron Woodley hasn't been trying to knock people out for the last 4 years. Like, if anyone saw his, what did I say, Dan, the other week? Post Wonder Boy. Since he fought Wonder Boy, I think it was the second time, he's been like that in the UFC, where he's been like kind of very apprehensive about attacking. So I don't think that came into it, and I don't know. It's unfortunate for Tyron Woodley in some ways, but I'm sure he'll be all right when he looks at his bank balance. And look, he no one can take off. No one can take away from him that he's a UFC champion and had a tremendous MMA career. I did hear Tyron Woodley say that he now wants to go and box like a few more fights, like 3. I think he said 3 fights next year. That could, I think, that would harm his legacy more for me if he goes and does like 3 boxing fights next year, loses them all, than just losing a couple against Jake Paul. This one on short notice as well. This was on 2 weeks' notice as well. So there's all different accesses. But right, we'll come back to boxing anyway in a minute when Ben comes over. Just before we let you go, Rhys, got sidetracked with Jake Paul, as does everybody. Something called the one word game. I'm going to give you basically 8, I think it is, or 9 names from combat sports, and you just say the first thing which comes to mind when you hear that name. Doesn't have to be one word, but just the first sort of thought which comes to mind. But before we do that, Dan, is there anything you wanted to ask Rhys before we let him go after this?
Yeah, what I was going to say to you was that both the Chamath and Moreno that you fought, they've both gone on some winning streaks thereafter after fighting you. Given that you get a return to UFC, would you rather fight someone like Moreno again, that I think is well within your capabilities to beat, because he's been racking up the wins, or would you want to show yourself to a whole new competition and just face someone fresh? Do you want the revenge, doubly by getting into UFC again and fighting one of the guys you had a loss to?
Yeah, like I think, I mean, I'm all up for both. I think, as you said, Moreno was so beatable. I think if I went in and fought Moreno, like I fought Oleski and McKee, I would have beat him. The fact is I didn't.
I agree.
You know what? If they gave me Morano from a return fight, I would take it. If they gave me an entry level UFC fight and then the next one was Morano, I would love to do. But I'm not too caught up in the whole revenge thing. I'm not that type of person. So if I get him, I get him. If I don't, I don't. But yeah, I would like to, of course. I'd like to put that right, of course.
Excellent. Good stuff. Good stuff. Right. Finish us off then, Rhys. The one word game. So you just give us the first thing you think of when you hear these names. The first one, as ever, Conor McGregor.
Legend.
Dana White.
Business.
Paddy the Baddie.
Marmite.
Okay. Jake Paul.
Marmite.
Yeah. Michael Venom Page.
Unbelievable.
Say it again.
Yeah. Canelo Alvarez.
Iconic.
Tyson Fury.
Always have to remember that Tommy or Tyson. Again, legendary.
And then the last one, Leon Edwards.
Controversial, but not controversial off his back. Controversial of like he should have got so much more in his career. He's another guy. It's like it'll be interesting to see where the next 12 months goes for him. Like he's the type of person you can end up seeing hanging up the gloves just out of frustration, and you wouldn't even blame him. But I hope he gets his crack this year.
We've talked about it. We've talked about him so much. Like how he hasn't got a title shot now is it's just so unbelievable. It's like you can't find the words to explain it, because like he's beaten everyone he's come up against. Of course, there was the one where there was the eye poke, wasn't there? But I mean, even that he was winning, and it's sort of like, come on, like at some point, there's no real explanation to why he hasn't got those title fights either. I know there's been a couple of fights fall through, but from what I can gather,
they tried to make him fight Chimaev when it was probably a bit too early. Not for Chimaev. I'm not saying it was early for Chimaev, but Leon Edwards deserved the bigger fight, not Chimaev, and they tried to make that 3 times. It was strange.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to get him to fight down all the time when I think he's second or third. He should be fighting up. He should be getting those big.
The problem with the UFC is they like the story. Like same as when brought Brendan Loughnane in, everybody wanted Brendan in, and I feel like they like the story of that. And same with Leon. I think they kind of love the villain card with the whole we're not going to give Leon what he should be getting. I kind of think they like that in a weird way.
But then it's weird, isn't it? Because like at some point you wouldn't blame Leon if he got fed up, and I have no idea if he's feeling fed up, but like you wouldn't blame him from the outside if he just went, do you know what? If you don't rate me, I'll stop fighting or I'll go elsewhere. Because
imagine he went to Bellator and fought MVP, or like how crazy would that be? But like when does that become realistic?
Yeah, like Bellator is really, really upped their game in the last 2 years in terms of who they've signed, the fighters they've been promoting. Particularly, I think like where lockdown happened, and they've been doing a lot of the kind of the Irish cards and the European cards. Like I feel like they've built up like 2 or 3 fighters in each division almost from Europe, where they all look like they're ready for really big fights. And you know, if someone like Leon Edwards was to jump in his prime, 1, there's some massive fights in Bellator for him, but also 2, it kind of sends out a signal that UFC is not the only place where you can get those big fights. Like one championship is quietly putting on these incredible cards as well, and I think they've been unfortunate because they had some massive fights lined up for December. For tonight it would have been, or last night, and it got cancelled because of COVID in Singapore and stuff. But like they over the last 12 months have really been building a bit of steam, and I just think the way UFC can sometimes treat fighters, not all the time, but sometimes, you got to be careful with these other companies kind of building a bit of steam who've also got money. Like, one championship is absolutely loaded with money. Bellator is not short of a few quid. Pro Fight League is not, they're not skint. They're not paying peanuts. So it's just something I think UFC got to be a little bit careful with people like Leon Edwards, Leon Edwards is a massive name. And I think they need to give him his due, I think is probably the fair way to say it. Right. Rhys, I apologise that we got taken over by Jake Paul for a few minutes, but listen, I massively appreciate you joining us for a chat as always. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and we'll get you back on after Christmas or in the new year, and when you've got a fight sorted, and obviously we'll have a chat and stuff. Best of luck with the surgery. When did you say your surgery is?
I'm not sure. I'm waiting on the date, but I'm hoping as close to January 1st as possible.
All right. Best of luck with that, my friend, and obviously have a great Christmas and all that good stuff. It's as always a pleasure, my friend.
Yes, so you two guys, Merry Christmas. Have a good one.
Yeah, and you.
Good luck, Rhys.
Cheers, buddy. Rhys McKee, another good guest. I love it, mate. I love it. I love all these guests every week. So I'm trying to be super strict on timings and stuff this evening because we've got lots to talk about. And we've got Ben coming at 9:15. So what we're going to do is just looking at right. Those questions and comments about Jake Paul slurred his words and all that about CTE. We'll talk about them later because I do want to put them to Danny and Ben as well. And also we got Chisora Parker to talk, Lomachenko from last week, and lots of boxing news. So we'll save that for Ben. And we're just going to go through or talk about the results from last night in the UFC. What did you make of it, mate? Overall as a show?
Yeah, some good fights. I found them quite entertaining. We've had better fights, but I wasn't bored or anything. I thought there's some exciting matchups.
We'll start at the top and then we'll work our way back. Although there were some big names on the prelims, I just noticed.
There was. But, I watched that Cobb Swanson one as well, so we can review that briefly.
We'll talk about that. Right. We have to obviously fly through them because we've got about sort of 10 minutes or so. But so Derek Lewis versus Chris Dakaus. Derek Lewis got the victory. About 3.5 minutes took before he stopped him. Derek Lewis now is the sole leader for the most knockouts in UFC history. Which I got to say, I think if Ngannou is active and fights to a similar sort of mid-30s, late, I'd have to check how old he is, but I think if Ngannou fights for a good couple of more years and is active, he'll probably be up there as well, because that guy doesn't go to points very often. But go on, Derek Lewis, mate.
Derek Lewis. I mean, he's just doing what he does best, and that's the hunt for the knockout. And Chris Daukaus is not someone that overly impresses me.
No, I don't know.
It's someone I expect Derek Lewis to beat. I think initially Daukaus had the sort of like right ideas on how to perhaps go about and fight Derek. He was aiming for the legs. I think that's a good call to hack at the legs, but he just wasn't elusive enough. Just wasn't switched on enough defensively. And Derek Lewis, once he did start clipping him, he really does inject a bit of pace to try and feel for the finish. There was a few opportunities, perhaps Derek was going to think about going for it, and he didn't. He held himself back, showing a little bit of experience there. But when it was time to draw the curtains, he drew the curtains. And Chris Daukaus, he couldn't deal with the pressure. Referee stepped in. I do feel, though, Derek Lewis's style is largely been found out in terms of like how you go about beating this guy, what you've got to avoid, and how about to go and beat him. I think some of these heavyweights are getting really skillful, and I just think winning in those ways are going to become less. Let's see whether I'm right on that, but I just think, tactically he's going to get found out, and strategically, unless he broadens his spectrum of skill set in that weight division. I think Derek Lewis is going to suffer some losses. I don't think he's going to be getting the KOs as frequently as we have seen him in the past.
I agree, but completely, mate. I just had a quick look. So Derek Lewis overtook Vitor Belfort. He's now got the 13 wins by knockout. So I was just looking. There's 6 fighters on 10. Francis Ngannou is 35. I didn't realize he was quite that old. He's got 12 knockouts in his career, but I'm assuming they're not all in the UFC because he's not in the top sort of 5 list in terms of. So was he in the UFC? He's 5-1 in the UFC, but I don't think he's got any victories via decision. If I'm right, I think. But I'm gonna have a quick look because I do think that he could possibly break that record. He's the guy probably in the short term who's going to do it. So we got, let me see, 1, 2, 3. He won by submission, even with Kimura in his 4th fight. 1, 2, 3. Sorry, mate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So he's got 10 knockouts. So he's one of the 6 on 10. So if you think he's only 3 or 4 behind Derek Lewis, and realistically, if he wins his next 3 fights, there's a good chance they're coming via knockout, aren't they? So interesting one. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson faced Bell Mohammed. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson lost again, mate.
Yeah, he did.
He's lost a few in recent years, hasn't he?
Yeah, again, similar to Derek Lewis, the style of Stephen Thompson is very well known. We know what he wants. He needs a little bit of space. He wants to control the pace. And I think when he fought Gilbert Burns, he showed some weakness on that single leg on the entry and on the takedown. Showed a little weakness there. Bilal was really probing and testing whether he had addressed the issue on that way of entering in on him and getting activated with the wrestling aspects. Bilal did a good job, really, of spoiling any kind of returns from Stephen Thompson. Thompson did look good occasionally in sporadic moments, but Bilal was back smothering. It was really good to see Bilal have a game plan, really stick true to it. Bilal, as we know, can strike very, very well, but you're just taking unnecessary risks against someone that's very, very well versed in striking and largely gets his successes on the feet. So great strategy, great game plan. He stuck true to it, and he really just squashed any capabilities of effectiveness from Stephen Thompson. Great performance. Stephen Thompson's going to have to either improve his takedown defense or improve his grappling, because his grappling to me and his scramble ups were faulty. They were not correct fundamentally. He was doing some of the things mildly wrong. I'm not going to say wrong in a big way, but you can see he's really struggling to create space and create movements to peel Bilal off him to get the scramble ups. He just was not effective in that area. I think had perhaps he addressed it and worked in those areas, he could have perhaps put it on Bilal in a way that when he did get space to be active, he could have been more consequential on Bilal and taken some of that energy away from him. But it wasn't happening. Well done, Bilal Mohammed, man. Yeah, he's a real danger in that weight division.
Yeah. He's getting a bit of a run together. His form's been good. I think he he's on a bit of a streak, is Belal Muhammad. We'll talk about him now.
It got caught with that eye poke, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
And
Stephen
I think
Thompson. Sorry, mate, I was just going to say, go on.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think Belal really would like to fight Leon Edwards again. I think that's something he really wants. But that would be totally unjust for Leon Edwards. Like we just said, 100%. He really should be fighting for something more like the title.
Yeah, it should be. So Stephen Thompson fought Tyron Woodley in November the 12th, 2016, which was a majority draw. And then they ran back the rematch in March 2017, which Stephen Thompson lost. So since that draw, he's lost 5 of 8 fights. And he's now on a 2-fight losing streak again. It does feel like if he was another, they do like him, probably because of his style, the way he fights. He's got that sort of karate stance, and he's exciting to watch a lot of the time. So I think from that aspect, people and the UFC particularly, they like that. But like 5 out of 8 is not good by any means. Belal Muhammad, on the other hand, since he lost to Jeff Neal in 2019, hasn't lost since. He's won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's won six on the bounce and drew and had a no contest in there with Leon Edwards. So if you take the no contest out, he's won 6 on the bounce. So he's got every right really to be saying, I want that Leon Edwards fight. I understand why he wants it. But
yeah, he has. He's pushed himself into a position to have some kind of weight to his voice. I absolutely agree with that. But in this particular instance, the fact that Leon Edwards has been waiting in the wings of something that I think we all agreed some time ago should be having a title shot, he should not have him to be facing someone, Belal Muhammad. And you have to remember what was happening in that match. Belal Muhammad was getting had up by Leon.
Yeah, he was.
He was doing a good number on Belal. So yeah, to me that doesn't need to be run back until Leon has had a shot at that title, as far as I'm concerned.
Maybe you could have it be Leon's first title defense. That
maybe
would
so.
Make sense.
Yeah, that would make more sense.
Next up was Amanda Lemos defeated Angela Hill by a split decision, 11th versus 12th. So this was always going to be a competitive matchup. How did you see it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching this. And Angela Hill constantly shows steady involvement all round with her striking combinations, her grappling and wrestling exchanges. I thought she looked good. In fact, I would have given Angela Hill the nod over Lemos. I think Lemos was just looking more impactful with the individual strikes. She's putting more ferocity into some of those shots. She did knock down Hill early in the first round. It looked like it was going to go pear-shaped for Angela. But Angela, with her experience, she's been around sport for a while now, really turned it around and started dominating the second half of that first round. Hill then got a knockdown of her own. She done a lovely spinning elbow in the latter part of the fight against Lemos and knocked her off her feet. I just thought Hill edged it. She was the one advancing forward, looking like she was trying to find ways to win pretty much at all times. There were just sporadic moments that Amanda Lemos was looking really visual because she was so explosive. But I didn't think it was enough to beat Hill. I may be wrong. It was one of those fights that I enjoyed it, and it was of such that I would like to rewatch it and try to look more at what Lemos was doing rather than watching what Angela Hill was doing, because that's what I found I was doing. I was watching Angela Hill more. I'd like to run it back again to see whether I still have that same opinion. But Angela Hill, she's been impressing me. She's definitely improving. She's definitely not done in this sport. She's showing desire and the will to win, the will to advance and improve her skill set. Every time she steps in, she makes my eyebrows rise. So I look forward to watching her again, even though this is a little bit of a setback.
Yes, indeed, mate. Then we had Rafael Asenko versus Ricky Simone. Didn't last too long, 2 minutes of the second round before Ricky Simone defeated him with a TKO. This was definitely the biggest win of Ricky Simone's career. I thought it was an impressive performance.
very impressive performance. Raphael, as we know, has been around a long, long time, fought the best out there, really has. And still a good scalp to take for anyone. Past his peak, certainly he is. He is past his peak. I think he's touching 39 years old, and in that such lightweight division, your edge of your speed is going to be, it's going to be tainted for sure. And I think that was the issue he had here. But let's not take nothing away from Simone. Ricky Simone was looking strong, calculated, great striking, great wrestling, showed great execution of control on the ground, and a good performance all around. And I think to be as dominant as he was against that caliber of guy, albeit a former version of himself, I still think was a really, really strong performance. Simone's there to make a statement. I think the statement was made with that fight, and I think he's going to go on and make more of those.
Yes, indeed, mate. And then the first fight of the main card was Diego Ferreira versus Mateus Gamrot, with Gamrot picking up the victory via TKO 3 minutes 26 into round 2.
Yeah, I mean, Diego Ferreira was looking good in this, but Gamrot was looking also good. It looked like Diego had good kind of game plan to try to find a ways to get the win, regards stealing the rounds of activity. Gamrot was not having it his own way, shooting in. When I say he wasn't getting his own way, he was getting the entry in, but was unable to control and secure the actual takedown on numerous successful shoots and entries. So a little bit of work to do regards to trying to get control when he gets people to the ground. But that might be just great prep with Diego Ferreira's camp. They might have just prepared well for Gamrot to not allow him to have that control on the ground. But Gamrot did get there. He did utilize some good little grappling exchanges, show some great striking. But that pressure, he eventually found a ways to win, and that's the thing with Gamrot. I think he's very creative. I think he's quite a smooth character. He's someone that's looks confident with his striking. Probably looks more confident with his striking than his striking really is at, which is a great attribute. If you're going to want to get close enough to get entries onto those singles up into the hip like he likes to do, you need to have confidence to kind of get involved with that pocket a little bit, and that serves him really, really well. Gamrot, to me, is someone that could always be close to the fringes of becoming a title holder in that division. He's 31 years old, I think, now. So he's going to have to get a pedal on and keep this trajectory going and make a real serious run for that title, because there's so many people in that division that be clapping at his heels, ready to take that place that he spent so hard to get to. He's racking up an impressive record. I think he's only had one loss. Is that right? I think it's one loss that he had, and that was on a decision against a guy that I didn't actually think he won. Even his opponent, I believe, if I remember rightly, even his opponent on that night said, "Look, I don't think I got that win." So to me, largely, Mateus Gamrot is unbeaten in my eyes. I just want to see him take on the top tier guys now and see what he's really got.
Interesting stuff, mate. You mentioned you watched the prelims. I didn't watch all the prelims. Yeah, I watched Cobb Swanson because I've always really enjoyed watching him. He always puts on a gutsy performance, whether he wins, loses, or draws. And it was a chance for Darren Elkins to try to, make some noises under the current of a much talented division, by trying to take the scalp of someone like Cobb Swanson. But Cobb Swanson, he ain't no guy that you can mess with. And I don't know whether he just caught Elkins by surprise about how fast and how switched on Cobb Swanson still is in his twilight years. Because Cobb Swanson really, if you look at his age, should be slipping past his peak, but he looked every part of how he was in his prime, and it was really, really good to see. He just thrown a lot of single delivery strikes like he knew they was going to land. He got such good sense of range. A very, very good performance. Just never let Darren settle, and made good decisions as well, which was really nice to see with Cobb Swanson. Cobb Swanson can sometimes drag himself into absolute war. Sometimes I think he wants to please the crowd. With this, he was pleasing the crowd and also showing good strategy and good tactics in not entering in too soon. He would enter in, do the damage, and he would assess what that damage got him. Then he would go in again. It was very, very calculated. It was really, really good to see. If he carries on with that kind of performance, with that kind of strategical thinking, he could make noises in that division again and start becoming something of relevance in there. Interesting, mate. Yeah, Cobb Swanson, he's still got the mind, even if his body is a bit slower than what it was. Like his mind's still sharp as ever.
He's strong. He's
really
just
good.
he's not shy to get into range, both to be hit or hit. But predominantly, he's the one that's still landing more than the opponents land on him. So as long as he can keep doing that, he'll be getting trajectory in the right direction.
Yes, 100%. So just as we wait for Ben, sort of talk a bit of MMA and that. Brad in the chat said he's looking forward to seeing Tom Aspinall again in the heavyweight division fighting on the 11th of March. I see. I bet isn't that 11th of March? Isn't that the week before the London card? If
Yes.
so, I'm very disappointed that that's not a week later and he's not on that London card, because that London card's on the 19th, I think, isn't it?
I believe so. Yeah.
Oh, that I'd be really gutted if Luke's not on that. Especially so close together, you'd think that they'd have him, have him on there fighting.
Yeah.
Whoever, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing Aspinall back in the cage, and I actually don't think it's going to be too long. And I know he's been quite sort of reserved about his plans for the future and all this type of stuff. He hasn't been calling out Ngannou and stuff. He's been sort of, I'm going to build my way up and this and that. I think because that heavyweight division is not as deep as some of their other divisions. If he keeps winning, especially in the way he is, it won't be long before he's right up there having those big fights against the likes of Stipe and whoever else may come around. It just won't, because they haven't got the depth of talent there. So once you've kind of beaten a few, you're up there. It's an interesting division though, because I think Tom Aspinall does something which some of the other heavyweights, maybe apart from Stipe, does. He's got knockout power, but he's also got a bit of an all-round game about him as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how he sort of develops his run or how his UFC run develops, should I say.
Yeah. And I know he's in a heavy division, but he's a big, strong, very young, tenacious young man. And you're right, his attitude was a little surprising to me. He's not being passive, but he's being totally respectful and level-headed and realistic about everything. And I think that's actually going to see him through well in the long run. He's not putting himself under any expectations or any pressure. He knows that he's up there and can compete, but he's just not being overly brash with it with an attitude. He's not putting on any kind of character other than the person that he is. And I'm really warming to him. And I've got a good gut feeling this guy's going to be successful, and not for a fleeting period. I think this guy's going to be successful for quite some time when he gets to the top. And yeah, that is a prediction from me. I think he's going to get to number one, and I think he's going to stay there for some time. Really like what this guy's got to offer, both visually as a combat athlete, but also with that attitude that I get, confidence from every time I hear him talk. He's just level-headed, the same each and every time. What a great guy. I'm sure the fighting talk will come out as he becomes more confident. Maybe he's a little bit shy, but yeah, he's saving it for the right time, and that right time will come in duration. I give him 2-3 years, and this guy will be, I think he'd be number one.
He's 28. He's 6'5". Very, very skilled fighter. And I just think he's got all the tools to go and be quite special. We haven't had a British heavyweight in the MMA really to go and really challenge, certainly in recent years. So I'm really looking forward to it, because, there's just something about heavyweights in combat sports that people really, it's the big show, isn't it? It's in boxing, when it's the heavyweight title of the world, there's just something special. So to see a British contender with the skills that Tom has got, it's going to be special. He's a big boy as well. So
he's a lump of a guy, and I don't see an unfit way. He's just a genetically
he's an
big
athlete,
guy.
mate.
His bones are thick.
Derek Lewis is big. He doesn't always look the most athletic, does he? No. He can look quite awkward and sometimes can look a bit overweight, should I say, maybe. But Tom Aspinall just looks like an athlete who's big.
Yeah,
and
dense.
that excites.
Very
Yeah,
dense.
it just exciting. And I can't imagine someone like Stipe, who's only got maybe a couple of fights left in him. Can't imagine he's going to want to fight Tom Aspinall anytime soon, and unless it's for a title shot.
Yeah.
But to finish us off this is the last live show of the year. It only seems appropriate that we bring in our boxing pundit, specialist, whatever you'd like to call him, friend, Mr. Ben Doughty. Welcome, my friend. How are you? Welcome to the last live show of 2021.
I'm good, guys. Good to see you again.
Yeah,
Indeed. And we've got loads of boxing to talk about, which is why I said to you, come on a little bit later, because then we can just kind of we can home in on the boxing side of things. So before we get to the numerous boxing topics, I wanted to just make mention. There's an amateur boxer in Belfast called Stephen McCullen, who's actually he's in intensive care. Seems as if he was all right after the fight and when he was checked over, but it was after when he went home he fell ill. Now in intensive care. It seems to be serious but stable condition. Ben, I know I mentioned this to you earlier just to see if you could find any sort of further information and stuff. But I mean, it's obviously sad to see, but it's one of the risks of combat sports, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's something I think it's always a bit more of a shock when it happens in the amateur game as well, because I think, with professional boxing, because of the longer fights, 12-round title fights and such, sometimes men are pushed to, and women are pushed to their absolute limits of their resilience. And you will often find, particularly sometimes in a fight where people have had to make weight and they're actually very well matched and push each other to those kind of, the kind of deep waters. You see the situations even where there weren't fatalities, but like Eubank Watson rematch back in 1991. Sometimes you get those kind of unfortunate things happen, but in the 3-round game, you don't expect that usually, So it's always, I mean, obviously we've seen the occasional situation in the amateurs and the occasional fatality as well. But yeah, it's always more of a surprise. I think it probably is, no doubt, just one of them, statistical unlucky things. That this young lad, Stephen McMullen, suffered some kind of concussion after losing his bout. I think he lost the bout on points, if I'm not mistaken, right? And then he had some issues in the hours, the day after the fight. So I think it is just purely unlucky. Let's be honest, it's not healthy, is it? So hands weren't made for hitting people, and heads weren't made for absorbing that type of punishment. And you know what? There's a friend of mine on Facebook. I mainly know him. He's called Gary Turner, who's a bit of a boffin in terms of his sports science, and he's done a lot of research into head injuries in combat sports. And basically, to be honest with you, what he's come up with is don't do it. I mean, because he talks about the things you suffer every time you experience a concussion, the negative aspects associated with it. And certainly, if you really took Gary's research to heart, you'd never let your kids box or do MMA and all that kind of thing, because you just think they were too vulnerable. But I don't know what Danny thinks, but I do come from the school of thought which kind of says you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. I do justify the risks of boxing. And I'm sure I'd have the same value base if I was more connected to MMA. I'd probably have the same stance on it, But there's no denying it is not good for you, And you take those risks when you get involved, don't you?
Interestingly, Ben, I hadn't planned to go into this now, but it kind of fits in. We had a couple of questions earlier because we mentioned Jake Paul and stuff. In the run-up to the Jake Paul Tyron Woodley fight, Jake Paul mentioned that he's having memory issues and he's been slurring some speech. He did say after the fight yesterday that that's not exactly what he said and it was taken out of context, but he didn't explain the context though either. However, for someone as I think he's mid-20s, late 20s, that would be a concern in terms of the long-term effects. But then I've seen a few people, someone asked in the chat earlier, is he just looking for an excuse to retire undefeated? But
my feeling, right, Simon, without following the guy obsessively, as you know, my gut reaction is he's trying to. That's a bit of seeking a bit of status. I am a real fighter. Look, I've even got dementia pugilistica like real fighters. That's how serious and hardcore I am, man. I'm actually starting to get cerebral damage. That's my feeling. I mean, call me cynical, but that strikes me as someone who's kind of almost groping for credibility by saying, you know what, this is a tough game, man. This ain't no joke. When I don't know. I mean, how many fights has he?
I think he's had
how many fights has he actually had in any context whatsoever?
And a couple of. He's barely been touched, really. But then, what sort of training is he doing? I don't know. But I mean, we'll touch briefly on that fight from last night.
Yeah.
Jake Paul knocked out Tyron Woodley. I don't think. My personal opinion is I don't think you can have any doubt he knocked him out. So I said earlier in the show, Ben, when I saw it on Showtime, because I saw loads of people on social media saying, oh, he drops his hands, he's taking a dive, blah, blah, blah. So I went into it expecting like a nothing sort of shot, just barely glancing him. Yeah. And that's what knocked him out. I saw a clip off the Showtime TV feed, and I thought, well, he looks like he's caught him, but all right. And then I saw a clip from like someone at ringside who'd filmed it, and you heard the thud and you could see the power behind it. And I thought it looked like a legitimate knockout. Like he looked like he caught him. He looked like he set him up for it with some other shots, and he just knocked him out, basically. I haven't seen the full fight because I don't want to watch the full fight, but I've seen highlights, and he knocked him out by all accounts. Is what I could gather from it.
I think to me it looked like a legitimate punch. It looked like a heavy knockout. To be honest with you, so the reaction I've noticed from people in the boxing world has been, I'm not a fan, or I don't really rate him, but fair play, that was some knockout. I mean, most people have said so. So one thing he can do is punch, at a certain level within a certain remit against a guy who's not really a boxer either. But I think it was a legitimate knockout, and I suppose it's probably garnered him some degree of credibility from what I can see, because people are saying, well, you can't say it wasn't a good shot, and fair. No one's overlooking a good shot. Look like he landed sweet to me. Fair play to him.
I got to say, Ben, for what I saw of the fight, and I haven't seen it in full. I've only seen highlights of it. I've got to say, I think Tommy Fury looked at that and probably thinks, I don't want that, because I think he beats Tommy Fury. From the little I've seen of Tommy Fury, I just think.
And if that's true, that's quite damning, isn't it? Because Fury is supposed to be a guy who has a future, in the bigger world of boxing, in the legitimate world of boxing. And if people are saying that perhaps he wasn't sure enough of beating this guy who is a novelty act, an example of today's society and what social media is, the kind of impact it's had on sports and entertainment in general. If he wasn't sure enough of beating that guy, and if he could watch that fight last night and actually think that he might have dodged a bullet, if he does feel that way, I don't suppose he'd admit it if he did, but that's quite damning, isn't it? Because he's supposed to be, Tommy Fury has been sold to us as somebody who is the real deal, who's going to do big things at some point,
Yeah, I saw a lot of people saying after the fight that that's why Tommy Fury pulled out, because he was worried that he was going to lose, and he kind of had second thoughts. Whether I don't think, and I'm sure like Danny has dealt with fighters all his life, you've dealt with fighters. I don't think there's many fighters who would pull out of a fight because they all think they're going to win in terms of fighting.
Yeah.
So when they go
and I
into
think
a fight,
if he was really getting that much money, if he was getting the astronomical money people said, I just don't know why you would pull out.
It doesn't make sense, does it, from that side of it? So no. I do question whether we'll see that fight, though, which is whether you think it's a good or a bad thing. It remains to be seen. But I mean, I don't think we probably see it now, because I think Jake Paul's probably going to move on to other targets. So maybe Tommy Fury's kind of missed his window to get that money. I don't know, but we'll see. Onto the proper boxing. There was a heavyweight bout last night between Joseph Parker and Derek Chisora, the second time they've met. Tell us a bit about
Yeah, I mean that was an unexpectedly great fight. I mean, it was, to be honest with you, it was pretty straightforward and one-sided on one level. I mean, there's no doubting that Parker won it, and he had Chisora on the deck, 3 times, and it was only because Derek is such a fantastic old stager, and he's so gutsy and tough, but he's also become so ring-wise, in his dotage, that it actually went the distance. But it was a hugely entertaining spectacle. And what it proves to me, you look at Fury versus Wilder 3 and this fight, none of those fights were eagerly anticipated. People were saying they definitely didn't need to see a third Fury-Wilder fight. Yes. The second fight was too conclusive. The first Chisora-Parker fight wasn't great. And I remember thinking this is a bit of a scrape in the bottom of the barrel at Christmas time, last show of the year kind of situation. And I'd said that on my Facebook, I'm really struggling to get up for this fight, to be honest with everybody. But that doesn't mean it doesn't produce the goods sometimes. If you look at Fury-Wilder 3 and this fight last night, they both provided a lot of action and drama, and it was just like a kind of feel-good kind of spectacle, really, that made people feel good about watching heavyweight boxing on DAZN, for instance, in the case of last night. So, I think that the thing with Chisora is that he's had a great career because he's proven that it's not about being the best in the world necessarily. You don't have to be the best in the world. What he's proven is the value of doing you, as it were. He does Derek Chisora. He's a huge fan favourite. He's a quirky character, so people like him. People like his personality, even though he's as truculent and kind of almost offbeat as he is. People have warmed to that because it's him. It's organic. He really is a little bit of a flake, Derek. Yeah. And he's fought everybody, hasn't he? I mean, he's lost so many fights on the spin, but his market value has remained untouched. And he's done really well being Derek Chisora, taking on fights, the likes of Dylan White, Alexander Usyk, Joseph Parker, Carlos Takam, over the last several years. And I think he's proven he cut himself a really nice niche in the market, and he's earned so fantastically well just from taking on all comers and doing it in his inimitable style. So I think, what some people are saying is that he really, at 37, he does need to think about retirement now, because there's only so many of those shots that you can take. And he did take a lot of punishment last night, and he has done consistently in fights over the last several years. There is a price to pay, for that kind of for the entertainment that you're providing people with, and for the money you're making yourself. But yeah, I mean, I think if Derek does retire anytime soon, I think he would be fondly remembered as a great servant of British boxing who's given us a lot of good fights, But I hear that he says he'll be back next summer, as business as usual, and he's not looking to retire just yet.
I did see a post from him after the fight which said, he's back. He'll be back next year. Do you know what? Actually, funny enough, it must have been because the fight was obviously it was in the build-up yesterday. When I was scrolling through Facebook, there was a video of like the Chisora versus David Haye build-up, and they had that big fight, didn't they, in the press conference?
Yeah,
where David Haye grabbed a chair or something. It was I didn't realize. I don't know. Maybe I didn't pay much attention at the time, but I didn't quite realize how much it had kicked off during that face-off until I saw that video yesterday. Like there was some proper, like David Haye sort of elbows him in the face and then punches him, and then all hell breaks loose, and David Haye picks up a chair, and Chisora saying he glassed him, and it's wild.
Yeah. That was crazy at the time, and I think it was almost like it was one of the early signposts of this new culture that we've got that is now more kind of across the board, because it was Matchroom had still yet to really take over at that point. That was like, I'm thinking back, that would have been, they fought in 2012, Haye and Chisora, but because you know what happened, I don't know if you do know the backstory, fellas, but basically Derek Chisora extended Vitaly Klitschko in a world title challenge out in Germany, and David popped up at the post-fight presser to challenge Vitaly, okay? Having, he'd fought Vladimir, and he'd done, it was, you'll be aware of the Vladimir Klitschko David Haye fight and what a huge disappointment it was, all those years ago, and how Haye, he made what I think was a mistake at the post-fight press conference. He came up with the excuse that he'd injured his toe, and because he actually got his toe out and started saying, citing that as mitigation, he got slated, and the jokes about he used to come out to "Ain't no stopping us now," and all the jokes about "Ain't no stopping us now" and all this kind of thing. They went on for years. So he turns up at Derek's post-fight press conference when he's fought his brother Vitali and starts talking about, "I want to be up next. I've agreed the money." And obviously Chisora said to him, "Listen, this is not your show." Bernard Bonte, the manager of the Klitschko brothers, said it too. This guy's shown heart and done well and distinguished himself tonight, and you're trying to rain on his parade, and you should you should stand down. And from there, the kind of when Derek decided he wanted to go and face up to David Haye and have a get in his face a little bit, that's when it kicked off between the two of them. And somebody was allegedly hit with the bottle. I think it was Haye who wielded the bottle and all the rest of it. But what happened there after that was that Haye was technically retired at the time. He didn't hold a British license. So the British Boxing Board of Control suspended Derek's license because of the altercation. And David was only exempt from that particular sanction because he didn't hold a license at the time. So what actually happened was Frank Warren staged that fight under Luxembourg sanction in the UK. It was a very controversial promotion because it wasn't British Boxing Board of Control sanctioned. And back in 2012, there's been other precedents since, but back in 2012, we didn't know essentially that another licensing authority could underwrite a show on British soil without the British Boxing Board of Control being anything, being able to do anything about it or being able to veto it. As license holders of, like trainers, managers and whatnot, we all got letters saying that we were not to get involved with that show and we were not to work on the show. But I know several license holders who did. I even know Richie Davies, who was a Star Clash referee for many years. He got in trouble just for being seen on TV because he was seen there ringside with his woman. He got a call, I know, from Robert Smith, the General Secretary of the British Boxing Board of Control, saying, "Don't you think that was a bit fucking stupid?" Sitting there, smiling all over the TV. The board, they really wanted to make a point that they still did have control and that they could stop their members getting involved with it. But obviously, the fight went ahead. It was massive. I must be honest, I did attend it myself, just as a fan, that particular night. But the reason I mention it was a very interesting situation because at the time, it was highly audacious of Frank Warren to put on a show of that kind of magnitude that had such a backstory to it that was so, it's kind of so commercial and controversial when it didn't have the blessing of the controlling authority that has basically governed boxing in this country since the early 20th century.
Right. So that was just funny that it just came up yesterday, and I would assume it's to do with the Facebook algorithms and everyone talking about the fight from last night. But it sounds like it was a pretty entertaining fight, and I saw a few people in the chat saying like Joseph Parker just looks bigger, stronger, better. That's an interesting question. Gaz asks you, Ben. He says, "What does Ben think of the good that Jake Paul has done with regards to boxing, pay-per-view buys, new fans, and promoting Amanda?" He says female boxer. He apologizes for not knowing her surname.
Serrano. Is that Amanda Serrano?
Yes, that's
probably
the one.
To be honest, the people never really convinced me of that argument that this whole thing is they're bringing eyes to the sport. For me, that never really works in terms of bringing a new generation of fans. The only way you can really bring a new generation of fans is by great fighters and great fights. People only ever really buy into the real thing if it's Muhammad Ali or Sugar Ray Leonard or Rocky Marciano or Joe Louis or Jack Dempsey or Oscar De La Hoya. I've never known anybody. I guess it's early doors, isn't it? In terms of the Jake Paul or the YouTuber effect, I guess to be entirely fair to what I'm trying to say, we'd have to leave it a generation to see if it takes root. People start saying, "Well, I first got it." I mean, even like Rocky, the Rocky movies, you'll hear a hell of a lot of fighters who ended up becoming world champions and big stars saying that they started boxing because they saw Rocky 1 or Rocky 2. It's usually the first two movies that was around in that seminal time that created a lot of champions and sent a lot of guys to the gym, wanting to know what it was all about because they'd been inspired by something they'd seen on celluloid. So I think the Rocky franchise has had a big effect. For us to see the legacy of like Jake Paul or Logan Paul or whatever, I guess, to be fair to them, I suppose we'd need to give them time, would we? Like a 10-year window to see whether there has been any kind of germination, in terms of growing the audience or bringing more people to boxing. But I'm always skeptical that that's the case. To be honest with you, I think it's just more like is a casual interest thing. I mean, I'm not sure what. I'd be interested actually. The people who watch Logan Paul or Jake Paul, let's say, the people who watch Jake Paul and follow his career, what other boxing do they watch? And
that's what I was going to say.
How does that relationship work in conjunction with itself? Are they watching more fights now? Do they now watch Vasily Lomachenko because of Jake Paul? Or do they just watch anything that's to do with Jake Paul? Do they watch Canelo because they think maybe he'll fight Canelo at some point, as ridiculous as it is? Because you were talking about whether Tommy Fury's, missed that window and where he'll go from here. What will he do? To me, I'd have thought they are probably pushing him towards some scenario like that, would they not be? Where he takes on somebody that surely he shouldn't be able to stand in the ring with for more than 2 or 3 rounds. But there's that intrigue factor, like there was with Mayweather and McGregor.
I think McGregor might be on his list of targets. I think.
Yeah. Okay. So
he had so Jake Paul put he had a list of fighters who he was going to fight in the next 5 years or something, and Canelo was like the last name on that list. So there was all sorts of boxers and MMA fighters on this list, which he was going to work through, and he's worked through a couple, to be fair to him. But I believe Conor McGregor is the next on that list if you go in order. Personally, I don't think McGregor's interested at the moment because he's got to kind of repair his UFC run. Is taking a bit of a hit recently, so I think he needs to concentrate on that. But to me, Jake Paul needs to fight someone who everyone believes is too good for him to almost capture the interest now of people, because if he just fights another YouTuber or a UFC star who's retired, I don't think that does the same job. Like, he needs to fight somebody. So the full list was Nate Robinson, which he obviously beat, Anson Gibb he beat, Ben Askren he beat, Tyron Woodley he's beaten twice, and then Gervonta Davis, Conor McGregor, KSI, Tommy Fury, Kamaru Usman, Nate or Nick Diaz, and then Canelo Alvarez. So, I mean, when you look at that list, there's only 2 boxers on there, really, or 3, sorry.
I mean, something like Gervonta Davis would be interesting because he's tiny compared to Jake Paul, isn't he? But he would smash into bits, I do believe that. But it'd be interesting to get somebody ghetto and kind of cocky, like Tank, who like I say, is a little guy compared to the YouTuber, but he's vastly levels and levels above him in terms of skills. And he's also got that kind of hood attitude that I'll take that motherfucker out kind of thing, Because the thing with, I think I spoke to Danny about this before on previous shows. The thing with Mayweather and McGregor is we felt in the boxing community, we felt that he wasn't going to do. We couldn't rely on him to do what we wanted him to do, which was to defend the honour of our sport. But against gate crashers coming into it, we thought Mayweather is not above carrying somebody, or he's not above siding out and putting on a show. And you started to think, what if it was someone who had more of a kind of seek and destroy mentality, like a Saul Canelo Alvarez? And I think Gervonta Davis would have that attitude because he's a big banger, even though he's only a small guy. He's basically a natural lightweight, even though he's fought up at light welter. He's one of those guys who can fight in divisions above his natural weight and still take his power with him. So I think that would be a fun scenario, it sounds like to me, because I think Gervonta Davis would knock him out, even though he is a significantly smaller man.
I was surprised how big Jake Paul was next to Tyron Woodley. I was very, very surprised at how big Jake Paul looked next to him.
Yeah, so, I believe he's a proper cruiserweight, isn't he? I mean, he is, it's the kind of size when heavyweights are smaller. That's the kind of stamp that heavyweights were physically, back in several decades ago. And then obviously things got bigger, like everybody got bigger. And that's why we have these kind of supersized heavyweights that we have today. But he's bigger than a light heavyweight, that guy, isn't he?
Yeah, Rhys in the chat says, not sure if Broner's still around, but he isn't lacking any confidence in himself and probably needs a decent payday. So I think he's indicating Broner versus Jake Paul.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're talking about Broner for Conor Benn, aren't they? Because Conor Benn looked pretty impressive.
Well, he's next on my list to talk about, so that's nicely done there.
Nice
so
link,
let's go on
yeah. That's what they're talking about, Simon. He knocked out Chris Algieri pretty impressively the weekend before last, and the kind of names that people were talking up as the kind of next step for Conor Benn were either the winner of Amir Khan versus Kell Brook, which will take place in February, or Adrian Broner, who, although he's been beat umpteen times at this point, he's still a credible guy and a big name, isn't he? Because I think Broner has gone down in the history of this era as the kind of underachiever, which shows you how crazy the situation is when we can consider a 4-weight world champion an underachiever, because it does feel like he's thrown it all away to an extent, but he's still, because of the way things are these days and the devaluation and the proliferation of world titles and sanctioning bodies, he's managed to win 4 world titles while seeming to underachieve, and fall beneath his potential. But Broner is still a big name. His name still brings a certain amount of cachet, and I'm sure he would offer that cachet. That he would still have that cachet to either Conor Benn or the other guy.
Interesting. It's fascinating. So on Conor Benn, what did you think of his performance last weekend, and where should he go next?
I think you've got to give him his props. He is looking pretty good and pretty credible right now, considering a lot of people had serious reservations about him being a championship caliber fighter when he first started. Because obviously you suffer as much as you benefit from the platform of having a famous dad in that context. You do suffer from the comparisons inevitably. You always do. And there is more pressure on you. We've seen it with Campbell Hatton and we've spoken about it. But I think Conor Benn has grown into a pretty credible. I think he's emerged from the shadow of his father at this point, and I think he's grown into his own and a fight. A decent fringe world class fighter, maybe in his own right. The big story amongst the hardcore boxing people at the minute is the fact that he doesn't want to go anywhere near David Avanesyan, the European champion, the Russian guy. Yeah. But I saw an interview with Eddie Hearn the other day on Boxing Social, and he said, listen, David Avanesyan's a good fighter. And he said, I think Conor would beat him. He said, but it's a tough fight. He said, but you know what? He said, no disrespect to Avanesyan, but outside of this hardcore, our little world of people who follow boxing, obsessively, he says his name means nothing, to anybody. He goes, we are building a global brand. He said, and we will do it against the right names. And those right names, he goes, even the Algieri, said we have massive viewership for the Algieri fight in DAZN in America. He says guys like Broner, they've got that kind of still got that cachet. Their name counts for a lot across the pond still. He says, so we're going to build him. He said, all these people, he said, we're not going to fight David Avanesyan because Dave from Dagenham thinks it's a good idea or thinks it'd be nice if we looked upon this with a whole kind of like it's a sporting meritocracy. He said it's a business. We know what we're doing, and anyone who thinks that they should be, telling us what to do needs to think again, because we know how to build global brands, and that's what we're doing with Conor Benn, and that's why we're not going to fight David Avanesyan. Now, I get all of that, but it's supposed to be a sport. What is interesting is the guy holds the European title, and do you know what the sad truth today? Sad or otherwise, depends on which of your perspective, but the truth, at least, is that the European title doesn't really count for anything anymore. It's not important. Conor Benn doesn't need what David Avanesyan's got, even though he makes him champion of half the world. It used to be such a powerful thing, accolade and achievement, and it almost always guaranteed you a world title shot when there were less world titles. Perhaps sometimes there might have even only been one guy, purporting to be a world champion at a weight. Imagine how crazy that sounds. And the European title was your gateway to that. Now it doesn't matter. As you know, Conor Benn holds other titles. I don't know what they are, but they're things like WBA international titles or whatever. They look like the same as the world belts, but they are some kind of subdivision of those belts. But as long as Conor Benn can draw, he's making an absolute fortune, and as long as he can draw good viewing figures against whoever Eddie Hearn puts him in with, he doesn't need to be the European champion. You know what I mean? And it's the guy who's got the title who has to go looking for the challenger. Trying to interest him in fighting him and bringing some crumbs to his table.
Yes, Danny, is that almost a little bit sad that the European title doesn't mean too much, but also too that boxing as a whole is going to make a fight is not going to make a fight based on the sporting competition because it doesn't make for good business, and they're going to go elsewhere. Like, I know we've touched on that before with regards boxing versus MMA and the sporting side of things. Like, you're a former world champion. Does it make you kind of a bit sad that the European title is almost not, I don't want to say worthless, but like Conor Benn could challenge for it, but doesn't?
Yeah, I think, what's important for any fighter is to have stepping stones, right? And, you win different titles. If you think of, like, in the UK, you have regional titles, and then you work up to British title and then European title. Yeah, of course. I don't think it's a good thing to devaluate the meaning of a title such as European. It's not good. Yeah. I mean,
where we're at. It's more about the, like I say, brands is a good word. Like when Eddie said he's building a brand, Conor Benn is a brand, and he's on a platform. These days it's all about media. But, I mean, look, Jake Paul is a brand, isn't he? That's exactly what he is. It perfectly describes what he is, and I think that has been the case. Sometimes you get a brand who can fight, like Conor Benn can fight, and I do understand why they want to move him the way they want to move him. And listen, it's not about just fighting the best anywhere, anytime, any place like that, or Harry Greb ethos. As noble as it is, that doesn't make sense. That's not how you move a fighter. I mean, I remember John Thaxton. It's not rocket science, but I remember John Thaxton years ago saying, it's not who you fight on the way up, it's who you don't fight on the way up. And obviously when you're plotting a course, you're trying to get the fighter to improve, and you're trying to set him different problems and riddles as he develops. But you don't want to put him in situations that he's not ready for, or just burn him out by too many tough fights. I mean, once again, I remember Barry Hearn saying that we don't have a right to watch a man kill himself every 8 weeks. He was talking about Chris Eubank at the time and his title reign. And they were talking about some of the more questionable world title challenges he faced during that period when he was defending his title on Sky every 8 weeks. And he said, we don't have a right to watch a man kill himself every 2 months. He said, sometimes it's an ordinary day at work and sometimes it's a special day at work. But with special days come special payments. So there is, rightly or wrongly, there is that business aspect. And there is that thing that says, listen, we are not trying to go to the OK Corral to test out our fighter's guns every single time he steps into the ring,
Yeah, I think I can see it from both ways, but yeah, I think part of me thinks,
it's a shame for Evanesian because he is a damn good fighter. And you know what? He may well beat Conor Bennett. I agree with Eddie Hearn to an extent. I think I don't say Conor would beat him and I don't say he would lose. I think it's a toss-up. It's a hard fight. And I guess, the risk reward is such that it doesn't appeal to them, that fight. Obviously, it appeals to Frank Warren and it appeals to David Evanesian because they're the B side of this thing. Even though they have the championship, they have the title, they are the poor relation in this particular equation. So they want the fight because, first of all, because they think they can win it, and secondly, because of the money that Conor Benn brings. But he doesn't need to fight the other guy, even allowing for the fact that he holds the European title because he has too many options. And that's the way that the boxing business has been going for a very long time. And I suppose the only way you could do anything about it is, I suppose, if you had some sort of, a bit like the UFC, if you had some sort of all-consuming global control or just franchise control that mandated fights, that, if the purses were there and there was, because my impression of the UFC is it's very lucrative, but it's very much an in-house thing. And you do what you're told, and you have to stick your neck on the block if you want the big money, and you kind of have to have the fights that you're told to have. It's a very competitive league, and there's nobody's position in it is guaranteed if they don't perform. Am I close, Danny?
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Right, you've hit the nail on the head there.
If we could do that with boxing, it either would or wouldn't be a good idea. Okay, but that's the only way I can see. So ultimately, yes, I prefer it if it was like that. I prefer it if it said, listen, you've got to fight Evanesian because he deserves a chance to make money against you, and you ought to try and prove yourself the best in Europe or even the best in Britain. There's good welterweights in Britain. Conor Benn can fight that he's never going to fight. Let's be honest. Never mind a couple of guys across the pond like Jerome Ennis, who's also, looks like a really hot contender who might be the best out of all of them, and he just wants a chance to prove it too. So if we were able to create a UFC type culture in boxing where you could dictate to fighters and their teams to a greater degree than you can now, supposedly for the good of the sport, for the good of the spectacle, then I guess that is the only way it would change. Because at the minute we have a kind of anarchy. You know what I mean? Enlightened anarchy where people kind of do what they want within reason, and the sanctioning bodies, the rules are there to be broken.
Ben, do you think in boxing promoters have got too much power?
So the reason I struggle to answer that question is I'm not sure how much power they ought to have. There ought to be more of a. When I look at football, even, and I'm not a huge football fan, but I get the impression that there's a national governing body. I know with soccer, and I know there's a world governing body. Okay, and I do think there's just much more. There's so much more control, and what there is there's a sense of levels which you can't just mess around with. In boxing, in the 90s we lost the plot in boxing. That was the era when you suddenly got guys who might not be anywhere near top 3 in the world suddenly winning world titles, masquerading as world champions, and we did that in the industry because the argument was more people could make more money from it. That's how we started running with that, whereas from what little I understand of football and of UFC and stuff like that, it's something where you can't really pull the wool over the audience's eyes to the same extent and expect to get away with it.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point, isn't it? So just before we talk about Lomachenko, we mentioned, or Gaz, I think it was mentioned about Amanda. I forgot her name again. Serrano, yes, sorry. And I noticed that one of the things that came out of last night, because she won her fight, was that they're trying to promote it as a super fight between her and Katie Taylor, which I thought was quite interesting. Because one of the things we talked about on last week's show was, I said Katie Taylor's done amazing things for women's boxing over the years, but I said, how many times has she genuinely been like challenged and really pushed to a limit when it's come to the actual opponents? And I was happy to be corrected, but I was just going on the little I'd seen of her over the years. I felt like there wasn't enough or a deep enough talent pool where she was, there was top contenders coming up through the ranks. Like, is that a fair comment from me, or am I doing a disservice to some of the people she's fought?
No, I think you're right in that she doesn't have that career-defining opponent yet. She doesn't have that career-defining fight yet. But, Delphine Pursoon, who she boxed initially on the undercard of Joshua Ruiz, won that big upset back on June the 1st, 2019. A lot of people thought Pursoon beat Taylor that night. Personally, I thought that. But Katie did give her a rematch back on British soil several months later. And I think she won it fair and square in the rematch, Katie. So I mean, she has been tested. You know what I mean? And she has had rivals who are good enough to run her that close. But I think the idea of another, multi-decorated superstar who's either coming down a division or coming up a division is something that she hasn't had that situation yet. So I think Katie's done really well, and I think she really is quite. She's got a pretty high profile amongst the new generation of boxing fans, particularly the zone. But I think she probably does need those career-defining opponents, the sort of, that name that people will always mention alongside Katie Taylor because they will remember the fights or the series of fights.
What about so is it Amanda Serrano a credible opponent for her?
Yeah, I mean she's something of a superstar. In American female boxing, and I think it would. I mean, the short answer is I think it would be. It'd be a lucrative fight for both of them, and I think it would perhaps elevate both careers to where they want to go.
Good stuff. I want to finish on Lomachenko, Ben, in just a second, but just really quickly, Danny, question for you. Gold Color says on the YouTube chat, Angela Hill was robbed again by a decision.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah.
You said that earlier, didn't you?
It was close enough to perhaps potentially go either or way. We know what judging can be like, but I just felt like she was the one working harder constantly to get the win. She was forcing the opponent to footwork back largely in the fight, and she just did great. I think she just continuing to improve. Like I said before, I just feel like she's expanding her skill set, and I just thought she was just doing enough to edge 2 of those 3 rounds. What can I say? Yeah, I just hope that she's not getting close to being cut, because I don't think we've seen the best of what she's capable of yet. I think that will be true robbery right there. So yeah, onwards and upwards for her. I'm sure from here on out, you can only imagine she's going to get an easier opponent. She could take a lot of the scalps.
Yes, there's some names for her to fight.
So hopefully she'll chew over a few more, perhaps lesser ranked females. Consolidate those new skills that I feel that we're beginning to see from her, and then she'll perhaps make more conclusive, performances in those fights to get the actual nod on the wins.
Yeah, fair, good shout, mate. So to finish us off for tonight's show, and indeed the live fight shows for this year, we're going to talk Vasily Lomachenko. Last week, Ben. Handily, I think it's fair to say, defeated Richard Comey. Yeah. There's a lot of talk about him fighting Kambosos Jr. Seems to be the fight he wants. But how good was Lomachenko's performance? A lot of people felt he won every round.
Yeah, I think it was a consummate performance, and I think that's, for the most part, that's what you come to expect from Vasily Lomachenko. I think he had a relative off night against Teofimo Lopez back in 2020, which that's not to denigrate Lopez's victory. I think he did a great job on the night, and he was taking on the guy that a lot of people said was the best fighter pound for pound in world boxing, and he actually made him look, decidedly human on that particular night. Obviously some people say that Lomachenko had a shoulder injury, which maybe he did, which caused him to get his skates on in that fight a little bit late. I mean, they say that he kind of blew the first half of the fight, essentially, Lomachenko, because he was a little concerned about his shoulder and being a bit overly conservative and stuff. But I'm prepared to believe he did have you don't make excuses. He turned up and fought and he lost. But I'm prepared to believe that he wasn't at his absolute best that night, and he didn't box out of his skin that night, Lomachenko. But I think he's proven the point that he's far from finished. I think that most people, he would start as a favourite against Kambosos if he were the next guy to get the crack at the man who is undeniably the world lightweight champion until further notice. And I think you conceivably make him a favourite against a whole bunch of them. Maybe Lopez in a rematch. I think Lomachenko versus Gervonta Davis is the big fight at lightweight. I think that it probably is the super fight that would really be the mouth-watering, salivating fight. Okay. But as we've said before, there's a lot of big guns at lightweight. You have Devin Haney, who's he's not a joke himself. I mean, I know Devin Haney was looking like the favourite to face Kambosos next, but that's not that's not a done deal as it stands. I mean, at the minute you've got Ryan Garcia. Not sure what's happened to him since he beat Luke Campbell. He's had issues to do with mental health, and then now I believe he's kind of risen above the parapet again. But I'm not aware that he has any fight dates actually made, although he's been vocal on social media and whatnot. But you have Lomachenko, Kambosos, Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson, who's also a major talent. Did I leave anybody out? And Lomachenko himself, So I mean, lightweight, if they make the fights, lightweight is probably the most exciting division in boxing if they make those fights. I mean, if they don't, it's academic. It's neither here nor there. But Lomachenko, sure. I mean, I think he's proven that he's still. He may well still be the best lightweight in the world.
Yeah. So
I just want to ask. Sorry, can I just ask about how would you rate Lomachenko's footwork? Because I don't know. It just seems to make it look different from nearly any other boxer I've seen. He was just placing himself so supremely over Comey, to a point where he was even signaling to his corner, look, do you want to stop this or shall I? So really 2 questions in it. Do you rate that footwork to be some of the best that's ever been seen? Because I can't say, but I'm not the boxing specialist such as you are. And also, do you think he let Rich Comey off the hook because he knew he could hurt him? Do you think he let him off a little bit and just let him run to the finish line?
I'm not sure whether he carried him as such. The thing about Lomachenko, we've got to realise, Danny, is he is a pretty small guy. I mean, he's not really a lightweight physically. I mean, he could probably have campaigned at 130 pounds for the rest of his boxing life. But the lucrative matchups and the newer challenges were at lightweight, which is kind of why he moved up to 135 pounds. So I think Richard Comey is a very tough, durable guy, and he's a much bigger guy at the weight. So I think that was probably a factor. Footwork wise, I think Lomachenko is, like you say, he's brilliant at pivoting. He's brilliant at angles because footwork. Some people look at footwork as it's a way to get you in and out of range. That's one thing, but what Lomachenko is really good at is manipulating the angle of his attack and putting him. Custamato used to say to the young Mike Tyson, you've got to put yourself in a position where you can hit him, but he can't hit you. Which sounds simple enough, but Lomachenko does that really well, doesn't he? I mean, he puts himself where he can get hit, and he has a vantage point and an angle of attack, which is just quite unusual. Being a southpaw as well, he's just very, very good at. He's fantastic at spinning people off and getting behind an adversary. Hector Camacho was good at it too. Back in the day, 1980s Puerto Rican lightweight star. But Lomachenko is definitely. I believe he did some sort of Russian dancing as a kid before he was allowed to box. His father had to do several years of this particular Russian folk dancing, which he said was all part of the master plan. He was going to be, once you get good at this, then we'll transfer you to boxing. I don't know if you've seen Lomachenko's training methods, but he does an awful lot of, using his nickname, he does a lot of matrix type stuff. Stuff like, where you've got to quickly press that button or match the colours or match the numbers and then quickly step off that, step on that. That light's come on. So now step over here. He does an awful lot of quick reaction drills in the gym. Mental stuff, my hand-eye stuff and all the rest of it. He does a lot of that.
Yeah. Gaz says, Ben, and I think we'll make this the last question because I think it's a nice question to sort of tie it all up in a bow. He says, what's the biggest fight financially for Kambosos as the champion? So if assuming that obviously he was the underdog, wasn't he? So I mean, for him financially, who's the biggest opponent that he could
I would say it comes down to either Lomachenko or Davis. It depends, if he fought Davis, they'd fight on PBC probably, right? The likelihood is that Floyd Mayweather, Al Heyman related platform. Lomachenko, I mean, that fight could be on Top Rank or could maybe even be on DAZN. I think the Tank Davis fight might be the most lucrative one, maybe for Kambosos. It's a very good question. It's a very interesting question. I would say it comes down to. I mean, see, Ryan Garcia is a huge draw, isn't he? I mean, because he's got a massive Instagram following. Yeah. So maybe that would be another fight. Which it is a very interesting question to say. What is the biggest earning first defense for George Kambosos? My feeling is that it'd be a toss up between Vasily and Gervonta.
Out of those three names which you just mentioned, including Ryan Garcia, which out of those three, if you had to put your house on it, like who do you think he beats out of those three?
Do you know what? I don't want to do Kambosos a disservice because I thought he boxed great against Lopez, and I think he's earned the right to consider himself the king of the lightweight division for now. But I actually think they all might beat him. I mean, I think Gervonta Davis would beat him, and I do think Vasily Lomachenko would beat him. That's not. I'm up for being wrong. Sometimes a guy you pick against him a few times because you're not quite convinced, and he keeps beating people, and eventually you hold your hand up and say, "Okay, so you got me." James Toney was like that for me when he knocked out Michael Nunn. I thought it was a bit of a fluke or flash in the pan. I love Michael Nunn. I didn't really get the brilliance of James Toney at the time. Then he went to the wire with Mike McCallum, and then then he fought Iran Barclay and stuff. And it took me a while to recognise how great James Toney was. So, but I think Kambosos boxed out with skin the night he beat Lopez. But I do think he would be an underdog against most of the leading lightweights. That includes Shakur Stevenson, Gervonta Davis, Vasyl Lomachenko, and maybe even Teofimo Lopez in a rematch. Although I think obviously Lopez would need to would need to sort himself out and take a good look at himself and be honest about the first fight, before you could see some sort of improvement there. But I do think you would make Kambosos the underdog against most of his leading rivals, to be honest with you.
Good stuff. Excellent stuff, in fact. So at exactly the 2-hour mark, we will end the Danny Batten Fight Show for this year. Thank you to everyone who's downloaded and watched and whatever through the years. Thank you to all the incredible guests we've been lucky enough to have. I might drop a compilation little episode next week, but there won't be a live show now until the first Sunday of January, where we'll be back with another guest. Myself, Danny, probably even Ben as well. He's and very, very happy to have Ben join us so much to talk with boxing. Gives a whole different outlook to it and a more detailed outlook to it, which is what we want, because we want to talk boxing and MMA, and I think it adds a nice bit of balance to it all. But Danny Batten, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Yeah, thanks, listeners, and Ben and everyone that's been on the podcast this year. It's been a really good year, and I've got a feeling my bones next year is going to be even better.
I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheers, Ben. Thank you for coming on so much, mate, over the year and stuff. And as always, a pleasure to have you join us.
And for me, see you in 2022. Yep.
Indeed.
Yes.
Take care, I guess. Cheers.
Cheers, boys. Have a good Christmas. Thank you.